For 11 seconds, a United States Navy fighter pilot watched an object perform maneuvers that violated every known law of physics, and the government spent $22 million secretly studying what he saw. That pilot was Commander David Fravor, a decorated FA-18 Super Hornet aviator with 18 years of flight experience. What he encountered that morning was not a weather balloon, not a foreign drone, and not a classified American aircraft. The object descended from 80,000 feet to sea level in 0.78 seconds, a speed that would require generating forces of approximately 5,000 Gs of acceleration. The human body blacks out at 9 Gs. Whatever was flying that day experienced 550 times that force and showed zero structural stress. What we know today about that encounter comes directly from declassified government documents, authenticated video footage, and official testimony, all released through programs most Americans have never heard of. This is the documented history of what military personnel witnessed, what sensors recorded, and what the government spent 2 decades trying to understand, starting with a program so secret that only a handful of senators knew it existed. In 2007, the Defense Intelligence Agency quietly established a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP. It operated out of the 5th floor of the Pentagon's C Ring, a location so deliberately mundane that most Pentagon employees walked past it every day without a second glance. The program was funded through what government budget experts call a black money appropriation. Money moved through classified channels that bypasses standard congressional oversight. Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, then the Senate Majority Leader, was the driving force behind its creation. Reid later confirmed publicly that he considered the program one of the most important things he had worked on in his entire career. The black budget allocation was $22 million annually, hidden inside the larger defense appropriations bill under vague contractor language. The primary contractor running research for AATIP was a company called Bigelow Aerospace, owned by billionaire Robert Bigelow, a longtime Reid ally who had previously built inflatable habitat modules for NASA. Bigelow Aerospace received the majority of AATIP funding and produced dozens of classified research reports covering topics that went far beyond conventional aerospace analysis. Those reports covered subjects like warp drive theory, traversable wormholes, dark energy manipulation, and the biological effects of encounters with unconventional aerospace objects. When these report titles were eventually disclosed through the Freedom of Information Act, researchers were stunned. The government wasn't just cataloging sightings, it was actively researching the physics that would make the observed phenomena theoretically possible. But the real story isn't the theoretical research. It's the specific incidents that drove the government to fund that research in the first place, and the paper trail those incidents left behind. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group had been operating in the Pacific for 2 weeks before the encounter on November 14th. During that entire 2-week period, the ship's advanced AN/SPI-1 radar system had been tracking anomalous contacts operating in a defined area known as the Combat Air Patrol Box. The contacts were appearing at altitudes between 50,000 and 80,000 feet, higher than commercial aircraft, higher than most military aircraft, in airspace that was essentially empty. Then, with no propulsion signature detectable by any sensor system on the strike group, the contacts would drop to near sea level in seconds. The radar operators on the USS Princeton, the strike group's primary Aegis cruiser, initially assumed their systems were malfunctioning. Senior Chief Kevin Day, the Princeton's operations specialist, later confirmed in official testimony that the contacts had been tracked for 2 full weeks before the November 14th visual encounter. Day's testimony stated that the objects appeared to violate basic principles of aerodynamics, showing no wings, no exhaust plume, no sonic boom, and no standard flight trajectory. On November 14th, the Princeton directed Commander Fravor's 2-aircraft flight to investigate a contact that had just dropped from 28,000 feet to hover at approximately 50 feet above the ocean surface. When Fravor arrived at the designated coordinates, he observed a large white disturbance on the ocean surface, churning water roughly the size of a 737 aircraft, and above it, a white tic-tac-shaped object approximately 46 feet in length. The object had no wings, no rotors, no visible propulsion system of any kind. Fravor began a downward spiral toward the object. The object mirrored his movement, ascending toward him at the same rate. When Fravor reversed course and descended sharply, a combat maneuver designed to cut off a pursuing aircraft, the tic-tac object accelerated to a position 2 miles ahead of him instantaneously. Not fast, instantaneous. The object then departed at a speed Fravor later estimated as being in excess of Mach 10, roughly 7,600 miles per hour, before the Princeton's radar picked it up at the prearranged Combat Air Patrol rendezvous point, approximately 60 miles away. It had traveled 60 miles in under 2 seconds. What made the Nimitz encounter different from every other UAP report in government history was what happened 30 minutes after Fravor's visual encounter. A second flight of FA-18s was dispatched to the same area. One of those aircraft carried a FLIR, forward-looking infrared, targeting pod. The AN/ASQ-228 Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared System, known as AATIP FLIR, is a military-grade electro-optical targeting system that tracks heat signatures with extraordinary precision. The AATIP FLIR successfully locked onto the tic-tac object as it performed a series of maneuvers. What the camera captured is what eventually became one of the most analyzed pieces of video footage in the history of the UAP discussion. The footage shows a small, bright, oblong object moving erratically against a thermal background, and at one point, accelerating so rapidly that the targeting system, one of the most sophisticated tracking systems in the American military inventory, loses its lock entirely. That targeting pod is designed to track supersonic missiles. Tracking is its only function. The object outran it. The video was classified immediately after it was recorded in 2004. It remained classified for over a decade. In December 2017, the New York Times published an investigation into AATIP, and as part of that coverage, the FLIR-1 footage was released publicly for the first time. The Department of Defense then did something extraordinary. In April 2020, the Pentagon officially authenticated 3 videos, FLIR-1, Gimbal, and Go Fast, confirming they were genuine recordings made by U.S. Navy personnel using government equipment, and that the objects in those videos remained unexplained. The official statement read, "The aerial phenomena observed in the videos remain characterized as unidentified, not misidentified, not explained, unidentified." The Nimitz wasn't an isolated case. Between 2014 and 2015, pilots from the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group reported a series of encounters in the airspace off the eastern seaboard of the United States. These encounters were reported over a period of months, not days. Multiple pilots, multiple aircraft, multiple sensor systems. Lieutenant Ryan Graves, an FA-18 Super Hornet pilot, became one of the most prominent witnesses from the Roosevelt deployment. Graves reported that the objects were observed almost daily in the military's restricted training airspace, so frequently that pilots began treating their presence as a routine operational concern. His primary concern, which he communicated through official Navy safety channels, was the risk of mid-air collision. These were not distant lights on the horizon. These were objects operating within the Navy's designated combat training areas, space that military pilots need clear to conduct realistic flight training. Graves described one specific incident where 2 FA-18 pilots almost collided with an object he described as a dark gray or black cube inside a translucent sphere. The object was estimated to be approximately the size of a large beach ball. It was stationary, hovering in the middle of a known flight training lane at an altitude where 2 aircraft nearly flew into it at combat speeds. The Gimbal video released in 2017 is believed to have originated from the Roosevelt deployment. The Gimbal footage shows an object that rotates against its direction of travel, a movement that has no aerodynamic explanation for any known aircraft. When air and wind analysis was applied to the Gimbal footage by aerospace engineers, they confirmed the object was not drifting due to wind or camera movement. It was rotating under its own power, or at minimum, through some mechanism that leaves no thermal or aerodynamic trace detectable by the AATIP FLIR system. The Go Fast video, also from the Roosevelt period, shows an object traveling at what appears to be extreme speed at very low altitude above the ocean surface. When researchers applied the targeting pod's telemetry data, the altitude, bearing, and sensor angle data embedded in the footage to calculate the object's actual speed, they reached a troubling conclusion. The object was traveling at approximately 40 knots, slow by aircraft standards, but that calculation only holds if the object was at the aircraft's altitude. If the object was at sea level, as it appeared visually, the calculation changes dramatically, requiring speeds that no known propulsion system can achieve at sea level without generating an enormous visible wake, sonic boom, and heat signature. None of those signatures were present. When the existence of AATIP became public in 2017, researchers began filing Freedom of Information Act requests for the program's internal documents. What came back was a collection of 38 technical papers and research reports commissioned by the DIA through Bigelow Aerospace's network of scientific contractors. The report titles alone represent a level of theoretical ambition that most people assume only exists in science fiction. That last report title is critical. The government was not just studying theoretical physics, it was studying physical materials that had been recovered and needed to be characterized and understood. What materials? From where? The reports themselves remain partially classified, but what was confirmed through official testimony came from Luis Elizondo, the intelligence official who ran AATIP for its final years before resigning in 2017. Elizondo, in interviews and congressional briefings, described a program that had moved well beyond data collection into what he called materials exploitation. He also confirmed that the program had compiled what internal documents referred to as a 5 observables framework, 5 specific characteristics that consistently appeared across the most credible UAP reports. 1. Anti-gravity lift, movement without conventional aerodynamic lift mechanisms. 2. Sudden and instantaneous acceleration, movement from stationary to extreme velocity.